You said something 3 days ago. It took 5 seconds to say, and you've replayed it in your head dozens of times since. The conversation is over. The other person has probably moved on, but your brain hasn't. Why? Psychologists have a name for this: rumination. And understanding what it actually is and why the brain does it is more useful than trying to force it to stop. Rumination describes the repetitive, often intrusive replaying of past events or conversations, particularly ones that felt unresolved, uncomfortable, or socially uncertain. It's different from simply thinking something through. Ordinary reflection moves forward. You consider a situation, draw a conclusion, and your attention naturally shifts. Rumination loops. It returns to the same material repeatedly without producing resolution, and often without the person choosing to go back. The thought simply reappears. Research consistently associates rumination with anxiety and low mood, not because replaying conversations is a sign of something wrong with you, but because the mechanism itself is searching for resolution in situations where resolution may not be available. One of the brain's important functions is detecting potential threats and predicting what might happen next. In social environments, an unresolved interaction can register as a genuine, open question. Did that person leave the conversation feeling differently about you? Is there a consequence you haven't yet accounted for? The brain treats these as unfinished business. Psychologists refer to this as the Zeigarnik effect, the well-documented tendency to mentally return to incomplete situations more than resolved ones. A conversation that ended without clarity registers as incomplete, and the brain, attempting to finish what feels unfinished, keeps returning to it. Here is what most people don't recognize about their own rumination. It feels like problem solving. Replaying a conversation doesn't feel like going in circles. It feels like analyzing, preparing, working something out. The mental activity has the texture of productivity, which is exactly why it's so difficult to interrupt. But there's an important distinction between reflection and rumination. Reflection produces new information or a changed perspective. Rumination produces the same material, processed the same way, arriving at the same place. Research on rumination has found that people often believe repeatedly analyzing their problems will help them understand those problems better. But sustained rumination can actually narrow thinking and make constructive problem solving harder, the opposite of what it feels like it's doing. The core problem is that rumination applies a forward-looking tool, problem solving, to a situation that is, by definition, in the past. You replay the sentence. Why did I say that? Then you replay their reaction. Why did they pause? Then you begin imagining what they thought. Maybe they think I'm arrogant. And suddenly you're no longer remembering a conversation. You're constructing an entire reality from information you don't actually have, filling the gaps with your worst interpretations, then treating those interpretations as if they were facts. This is where rumination becomes genuinely costly. You cannot change what was said. You cannot access new information about how the other person actually interpreted it. The brain keeps searching because it hasn't found an answer. But the answer it's looking for, certainty about a past social interaction, was never going to be available through repetition. Repeatedly dwelling on the memory can keep the associated distress active and make the thought feel increasingly difficult to disengage from. The replay doesn't dissolve the discomfort. Over time, it can deepen it. The most effective interventions for rumination aren't about suppressing the thoughts. Research suggests that attempting to suppress unwanted thoughts can paradoxically increase their frequency. Instead, they work by redirecting cognitive resources elsewhere. Two approaches have reasonable support in the literature. The first is behavioral engagement, doing something that requires genuine active attention, particularly something physical. The goal isn't passive distraction, but cognitive redirection, substantial enough that the brain cannot simultaneously maintain the rumination loop. The second is a deliberate shift in perspective. Rather than asking, "What should I have said?" ask instead, "What would I actually do differently specifically if a similar situation arose?" This converts rumination's backward focus into something forward-looking, which is what the brain was attempting to do in the first place, just more usefully. That single question marks the practical difference between going in circles and actually moving forward. It's worth remembering. Replaying conversations isn't a character flaw. It's the brain attempting to resolve something it registered as unfinished, using a tool that isn't quite capable of producing what it's looking for. Recognizing that distinction changes your relationship to the experience. Instead of feeling like a failure of self-control, the replaying becomes something more understandable, a search for resolution, using a method that loops rather than lands. And once you can see it for what it is, you're in a much better position to redirect it towards something that actually moves.